So now that we understand the revenue side of things for a monopolist, we can think about profit maximization. So profit maximization. Maximization. So for profit maximization, we're going to have the same criteria for picking the quantity as we did in the perfectly competitive markets. So our profit maximizing criteria is to produce until marginal revenue equals marginal cost, right? Because if marginal revenue is greater than marginal cost, that means we're going to make a profit on that next unit. The revenue we get from selling the next unit is greater than the cost of producing that next unit. So we should produce more. Where on the other hand, if the marginal revenue is less than the marginal cost, that means that the revenue we get from producing the next unit is less than the cost of producing it. We shouldn't produce that next unit. And we should produce less until the marginal revenue equals the marginal cost. And so this is why this, again, is this profit maximizing criteria. So it's the same idea as perfectly competitive markets. We just have a different looking demand curve and marginal revenue curve. So now we just need one graph for a monopolist, right? Because the firm is the market. They're the only firm in this market. And so as we said before, we have this downward sloping demand curve if it follows the law of demand. And we kind of talked about how we have this steeper marginal revenue curve. Because to sell more units, the monopolist has to lower, a single price monopolist has to lower their price on all the units they sell. Then we have our cost curves. So here's that kind of check mark shaped marginal cost curve. Kind of goes down at the beginning because that increasing marginal product and then diminishing marginal product kicks in, and that's why it kind of goes up. And then we're going to have our average total cost curve. And again, it's going to go through this minimum point, remember. So just make sure if you draw these curves, your marginal cost curve is going to go through the minimum point of your average total cost curve, because that relationship between the margin and the average. All right, so marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So we just got to find that point. Here's our marginal cost curve. Here's our marginal revenue curve. Here's where they cross. That tells us the quantity that this monopolist should produce. But a monopolist isn't going to charge this price. Instead, what a monopolist wants to do is charge the most possible to the consumers. And so they're asking themselves, what's the consumer's willingness to pay for this quantity? Well, their willingness to pay for that quantity is the height of the demand curve at that quantity. So how they set the prices, they go up. It's supposed to be perfectly straight up, but I took a little detour there, but they go straight up to the demand curve to figure out their price. So you figure out quantity where marginal revenue equals marginal costs, and that's Q star. And that's how much they're going to produce. But to figure out the price for this monopolist, we figure out what's the max that consumers are willing to pay for this quantity. So we go up to the demand curve to figure that out, and that creates this price. Now, to figure out profit, we can do the exact same thing as we did in perfectly competitive markets. We know this is the quantity produced, this is the price. Remember that profit equals price minus ATC times Q. This is Q, here's price. Now we just need to figure out average total cost at this Q. Well, that's this. So then I'm just going to go over, so I can put it on this axis. So this is like the cost. And so this whole area here is going to be the profit. So here this firm's making, this monopolist is making positive economic profit because the price they set is greater than the average total cost of the quantity they produce. So again, it's the same criteria for profit maximization to figure out that quantity. They figure out the quantity by setting marginal revenue equals marginal cost for the same reason we talked about for perfectly competitive markets. produce right there. Then to figure out how much they're going to charge, they want to know what's the max they can charge people for this much quantity in this market. Well, that's the height of the demand curve. So that's how they figure out the price. Now we have price and quantity. If we wanted to figure out profit, we just have to figure out the average total cost at this quantity. So just go up until we find the ATC, go over, and that's that average cost at that level of production. The difference here times this is going to be the profit, right? That's going to be equal to this. This amount is equal to this in the brackets. So that's one side of this rectangle, like the width. And the length is going to be Q star, so it's going to be this. So that's why profit, this area relates to this profit.